we've got trouble. And I'm not kidding. A number of years ago, I was asked to be the keynote speaker at the National Design Conference. It was in Minneapolis at that time. And I asked the question to the audience. The audience was made up of, maybe 600 or 800 of objectively some of the world's best designers, creative people that had had wonderful ideas, iconic ideas that many of you probably own. And I asked the question, how many of you have ever had an idea that you thought had vast commercial potential? Guess how many people put their hands up? This is not a trick question.
2 or 3?
None. Now, I didn't expect everyone would, but I thought more than no one would. And that was sort of an epiphany for me, especially, I'm sorry, everybody put their hand up. Then I asked the question, my apologies. Then I asked the question, how many of you have done something about it? Nobody put their hand up. That was the epiphany. I was shocked. And there was this palpable discomfort in the room. People were looking at the floor and shuffling their feet, because objectively they had great ideas. So I asked myself, why had they not done anything about it? Well, I think one of the main reasons, and it's what I'm going to talk about today, was, first of all, we don't, as educators, do a particularly good job of teaching you how to take an idea and turn it into an enterprise. But more than that, I think, was fear of failure. And that's where this trouble comes in. So we have trouble. And it is with a capital T, and it does rhyme with P, and coincidentally, it stands for pool. And it's an epidemic problem that we have in education right now, and we're guilty of it, and you're guilty of it, and I'm worried about it. So I'm going to talk about it today. We have conceded to what I call predictable outcomes as opposed to over learning. We've chosen predictable outcomes over learning. Okay? You've spent your whole life, and we've encouraged you to do this, trying to get the correct answer on the tests that you have. Right? We reward you for that. We don't reward you for taking risks. We reward you for getting the right answer. Well, unfortunately, nothing important happens when you know the answer already. There's no new knowledge created if we already know the answer. Right? So what's so wrong with that? Well, just that. We've systematically trained you to be completely risk-averse and terrified of failure. And the problem with that is nothing happens again without risk and failure. You know, it's interesting. I read a book a while ago that talked about a lot of the iconic ideas in our culture, things that we all take for granted, from xerography to the microwave and so on. And one of the threads that ran through every single story, this was a collection of stories, every single story, without exception, every one of these entrepreneurs and inventors had not only had failures, they had colossal failures. Failures to the point where you ask yourself, how did they have the will to go on? What was it that kept them going on? Henry Ford, here on the left, you may know, went bankrupt 3 times before he was finally successful with the Ford Motor Company. Thomas Edison had thousands and thousands of failures. We all know the Fred Smith story from Federal Express. If you look at the history of Federal Express, he lost money for almost a decade. He was in the hole millions and millions and millions of dollars. Right? You also may remember that his business professor failed him on his thesis. He said the Federal Express idea was the stupidest thing he'd ever heard of. It would never work. Right? These are all examples of people that somehow, and this is what he said about that. This is what Henry Ford said, failure is the opportunity to begin again more intelligently. Edison said, I've not failed, I've found 10,000 ways that won't work. They have this positive outlook on failure. And of course, Fred Smith said, fear of failure must never be a reason to not try something. One major difference between average people and achievers, in my experience, is how they respond to failure. Again, nothing important happens without risk and failure. So